Blast Films, a production company, and they had the idea to do a 20th year anniversary documentary on the tsunami, which would be archive led. I had recently worked on a similar series on 9/11, which was also and I thought, oh, that could be very, very powerful. And the task would be to find the archive and find the people in the archive, and then to kind of tell this global story. So, yeah, we worked on it for 3 years, and I'm very pleased. I think it's a very, very powerful watch.
So I was contacted by one of the researchers at Blast, who sort of gave me the basic outline of what the challenge was, what the objective was, and also who was behind it. Hearing National Geographic was behind it, and I've always been fascinated by the natural world and been a Nat Geo subscriber for years as well. So I thought that was really interesting. And although I'd seen documentaries and then that film, there was nothing ever of huge kind of production value. Not that it needs to be big budget, but you know, I knew that. And looking at Danny's previous work, that it would be an amazing project to be a part of. So being 20 years down the line, Theo and I were more than happy to kind of get involved, tell our story, and watch how it was put together with our story, along with, you know, all the footage that's found and all the other amazing stories as well.
Yeah, I think these kind of documentaries, they're very human-centered. The whole idea, actually, when you do a documentary about a big event, sometimes people focus on the history or the politics or the science. For me, I'm very interested in the humanity. And I think these kind of big catastrophes, global cataclysmic event that affected so many people in so many countries all in just one day, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we do a series, you know, it's a 4-part series, and you get to hear from people in Indonesia speaking, you know, their own story with their own voice, in their own language as well. People from Thailand, people from Sri Lanka, and a lot of Europeans as well, and all kind of different perspectives, very different backgrounds, and very different stories, but so much common humanity, you know. And so for me, that was just such a wonderful opportunity. And yeah, I was very grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean, for me and Theo, all we could do is tell our story, kind of recount the events of the day, and kind of obviously how that affected us. But I think the way that Danny and the team put it together, really shines a positive light on everything, really, is on our story, as well as looking at the positive aspects of lots of other stories.
Well, there were many challenges. It was a complex project. I think the biggest one was probably the first step, which was finding the archive, the video archive from 20 years ago. You know, it's not the kind of thing where you just go to the usual agencies and just get the usual. We wanted to find a lot of never before seen archive. And that meant traveling to this country, knocking on doors, checking on drawers, meeting people, going to the TV stations that had never before received a documentary crew, and see what's in your archives. And that way we found a lot of material. So that was the first challenge. But then the second challenge was, okay, there's a man there and he must have a wonderful story. How do we find them? And again, that was another big challenge, because it was 20 years ago in a poor country, people were displaced. And so we had to get all these teams in all these countries with amazing researchers and producers, with that task of finding finding creative ways of finding the people. And so then when we did, it all just came together. And it's, I think, so much more powerful when you're seeing archive that has never been seen before, extraordinary images, and then you're hearing directly from the people in that archive, or the people who were in that location. It just makes it really come alive in a completely different way. But it's only possible if you do this long process of research first, and that's the backing that National Geographic gives you, so which is why I like working with them. I think a lot of people have a misconception of what a tsunami looks like, and I think it comes from films and the gigantic wave the size of Godzilla that's just coming, and it's not like that. It's just water that comes in and pushes, and one of the big signs is if water goes back. And so that's the first red flag, that if you ever see water acting very strangely going back, it might be a tsunami, especially if there was an earthquake that you felt, or ground shaking. So a lot of the people that did know that saw it on a documentary, funnily enough. Like, they saw a documentary about tsunamis and they said, okay, I think so. What I'm hoping is that a lot of people watch this and then it just becomes, ingrained in their mind, because they almost like experienced it through the documentary, that if the water goes back, be a giant wave like in the movies. It can be just something on the horizon that seems a bit strange, and get to high ground, get to a tall building, and you'll be safe. It's the people who stayed on the beach by the shore that were at greatest danger.
That was absolutely my experience, and I had no knowledge of what a tsunami looked like, and certainly none of the people that were at my quiet zone, the place we were staying, did either, because everyone was just fascinated by the retreat of the water and confused, and obviously that very quickly changed. But yeah, it's great that this educates people for that, and hopefully saves some lives.
For me, it's when you meet survivors of big horrible events, people who got very close to dying and then survived. They all tell you like what they were thinking in their last moments, and it usually is they were thinking about their loved ones. And I think all the trivialities of life just disappear. At that moment, you realize what really matters, what doesn't matter, and it changes their life. It changes how they live their life from then onwards. So I think there's a lot of wisdom from people who survive these events. And so that's what I'm trying to capture on the documentary. I'm trying to retell the day. And then by getting into their minds and seeing that for those experiences to not only stay with them, but also stay with the audience. And I think it's just an important lesson.
Right. Yes, it's still being studied intensely. It's still being studied. It's essentially this probably the largest tsunami anyway, it's still being studied, and there have been there's been essentially a revolution in both seismology and in oceanography as a result of this. And what I was doing then and what I'm doing now, even more so, is working with the whole community is coming up with entire new methods of characterizing an earthquake and its potential for a tsunami very, very quickly as possible and accurately as possible. And in particular, the people that we really want to focus on, or that have been my focus, and many others, is the local closest populations where it's not only the most difficult to get a timely warning to, because they're close enough by with not much time between the earthquake and the tsunami, and also where most of the casualties are. So many methods have come, everything from better ways to characterize the size of the source before the shaking is complete, to being able to characterize within minutes instead of hours how the quake breaks. Are we dealing with a strike slip San Andreas type event where the motion is all sideways, or are we dealing with an underwater mechanism where the motion is lifting the sea bottom, if you will, which is necessary to move the water, and all the way down to very quick seismic images of the fault plane itself and which areas are breaking, because earthquakes aren't points. They tend to be ruptures over very long areas, and think of it as a huge two-dimensional plane. And so they're patches of much larger slip than other patches, and we can tell now in maybe 5 or 10 minutes where those patches are. So anyway, yeah, and of course the Indian Ocean now has tsunami warning centers. At the time of that event, it had nothing essentially. So yeah, tremendous progress, if that's what you're asking. Yeah. Well, there's all sorts of different technologies. There's the technology behind the seismology, the research and the new methods. There's oceanography. There's much faster telemetry systems, which are essentially radio. I mean, everything, all the components have just, as you say, radically improved. Really, they come down to dealing with very fast telemetry systems, which function at the speed of light, electromagnetic energy. And then as you go down in speed, then you've got the seismic waves, which travel through the earth very quickly. And then as you go down even further, you've got the tsunami waves through the ocean, which travel at an even slower rate. And so that difference in speed is what enables the whole process. And so we can, because you can warn using, the faster wave. For example, earthquake early warning is now in place in Italy and the United States and a bunch of other, Japan, and that didn't exist back then. And that's taking advantage of the difference between the speed of light, radio waves, and the seismic waves. It can actually get you a warning before the shaking begins where you are.
Yeah.
And then you take that one step slower, where the earthquake provides you information for tsunami waves, which will travel slower and get to you much later. So, without getting specific, it's all of those areas. The telemetry is much faster, it's more robust, it can survive, in some cases, the shaking, strong ground shaking. The seismology is just many, many more methods of characterizing the earthquake source quickly and whether or not that source might produce a tsunami. And then very fast tsunami models that then take the earthquake motion and give you some idea very, very quickly of what kind of tsunami could be expected in various places and how dangerous and so forth. In addition to all that, the other two components are the actual civil defense infrastructure, which in the Indian Ocean didn't exist and now does. And then the other leg of the three-legged stool, so to speak, besides the population. What do I do, when I, am faced with it? What's the smartest thing to do to be safe? So all three of those and all the technology have all increased tremendously. I think one of the most valuable corrective misconceptions from the documentary, which may have happened earlier, is you're not dealing with, water waves or surfable waves. These are not waves one surfs. These are steamrollers of walls of water that come in. These are actual steamrollers. It's, just think of a steamroller of water coming in. It's not, and then swooping in for a mile and taking a long time to come out. It's dispelled the idea that you're dealing with a wave in Earth. Yeah. There is one thing, if I have time, I wanted to mention, which I think is important for a parting message, is that I think it's very important for people to realize that the ground shaking can be their tsunami warning. That's probably the quickest warning you'll get if you're near the coast and feel the ground shaking. And even if you don't feel very strong shaking, you may feel relatively strong shaking followed by a very long time, 20 or 30 seconds of longer period motion, shaking no longer. I would strongly advise that to spread the message far and wide that is your warning to just, skip the gym that day and go for a nice walk inland. Maybe 50 feet, 100 feet.
Do something else, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of challenging things. It's hard to pick one. I guess, for the team on the ground, the most, initially the most challenging thing was finding the archive, the scale of archive. We had a lot of time and resource from Nat Geo to do it, so that helped with the challenge. If you didn't have that, you couldn't even do it in the first place. But we had, around nearly 2 years to make this series. But it was still hard because in those areas of Southeast Asia, you don't have the normal routes that you go in the West to get archives. So, here you might tap up Reuters or the BBC or CBS or whoever. To find archive in there, you just don't have that infrastructure, coupled with the fact we wanted archive that haven't been seen before. And so it's how do you go about taking on that challenge? So yeah, the geography was a big challenge. We had individual stringers and fixers in individual territories who were really brilliant on the ground, and they really helped with that. And our team had quite a bit of time recceing, going out to those places and literally sort of banging on doors, walking, putting out social media, call outs, flyers, hanging flyers in the streets, all sorts of things to try and A, find material, and B, find characters that were in the material. And some of it was just luck. So for example, the story that you see in episode 1 where the baby's being rescued on the bridge. So that has never been seen in any capacity before. And to find the guy who gets the baby, the team through a long process, essentially managed to get hold of that material. That's a whole story in itself. But then when they did get that material, they took a still image of that individual man, and they were planning to put a big call out and do a lot of work. And they didn't have very long to find this guy in the archive. And they happened to have a driver that day who was taking them around. And he said, oh, let me see the picture. And he took a look at this guy. He said, oh, that's one of my best friends. So like there was a lot of luck and unbelievable like serendipitous things that happened at times, and you sort of need a bit of that as well. But part of that is just about having a really broad, extensive search. So that was one of the challenges. Then it's like finding the characters, you know, in the material. Then just putting all of that material together. We had about 100 people that we filmed with and about 300 hours of archive. And the edit was definitely a kind of push and pull around like how much we lean into the sort of sadness and the kind of devastation versus how much you want hope and redemption and some of those, you know, those sort of elements. And also which characters make the cut, because it could have been made in so many different ways. And that's just a kind of complicated, long editorial process of conversation, really. And just having a kind of instinctive judgment on what's working and what's not quite working. And also there was the issue of sort of working out the timeline, and making sure we're sticking true to that, and then using the graphics maps we used. So we basically found like data points and got a graphics company to track the waves. So that also was, you know, a challenge in some ways. Yeah, that was critical to us from the beginning, because we didn't want to make a kind of sort of specialist factual series that was all about facts and figures, or something really bleak that people don't, because especially if you're making 4 episodes, what you don't want is for people to watch episode 1 and then go, oh my God, this is too dark, I can't watch anymore, and then turn off. You do want people to feel pulled through the series. So that was important to us. In terms of the humanity, I think when you're making any documentary series, hopefully as a filmmaker, you want to draw emotion out. You want to capture those characters, and hopefully we did that and capture the essence of those individuals. But as the series goes on through through the series, I think you see more and more stories of rescue, redemption, and that's partly because in that first hour, there's almost barely such a, I mean, there's a bit of rescue, like with the baby on the bridge, but nothing, it was so instantaneous and so many people were just wiped out that you can't have those kind of classic stories of like rescue in the way that you can as the story progresses. And then by episode 4, it's very much about people that stayed around to really help. So yeah, that was all very important to us to capture in the series. Yeah, so we heard that there was some archive of the Emerald Cave, and I can't remember exactly how we knew about the initial kernel of that story. I'd have to ask James, who was the producer on the ground. But like we knew there was we saw some amazing archive. What we didn't have was the master material, and that was a really hard job to track that down. And often like what you found with archive in Southeast Asia is it had kind of it had been cut down for a TV package, and the master material had like logos stamped all over it or cheesy music, commentary, and we couldn't get the original material. So that was a challenge. But definitely we felt as a team, at one point actually, we thought a whole episode would be built around that Emerald Cave story because it was so strong and very layered and complex. You know, there were a lot of feelings of sort of guilt around that story in terms of, you know, Olivia feeling very guilty about what happened with her mum. There was sort of complexities between Olivia and her brother and how he'd sort of dealt with telling her about the passing, you know.
Yeah.
So she felt like she missed that moment. So it was all complex. She had sort of worked through some of that, but some of it did come out. And it felt like that was one story that we really had to balance in terms of how we told it editorially, because it was very heart-wrenching, and when you watch that interview it was so painful, the pain was on the surface. So we did sort of pare that back in places, and I hopefully the family are happy with the outcome. I think they will be, and you know, they have worked through a lot of that pain, but it was obviously a really traumatizing story and like really traumatizing event. Yeah, I mean, we definitely had debates in the edit about how much we have stories like that, where it felt really bleak and kind of sad, but also needing to tell those stories because you do want to feel emotionally drawn, and you do need to show what happens. You know, you do need to show that scale. Good. And actually that story of the rescue wasn't originally in the cut, and again we were like, oh, how do we turn this into a story that has a bit more hope, that you do show a rescue, you show that other perspective? And so we filmed with him and, you know, use that piece of the puzzle, and that really worked, and I think it made the story stronger for it. Yeah, in terms of the sort of tsunami itself, or this event, I mean, I think there's a few things. One is that in those times nobody really knew what a tsunami was. Now I think like this series educates people at a very basic level of what to look out for. But yeah, in terms of the event itself, I think at the time, you know, it was a big event, but people quite quickly forgot about it because it happened in Southeast Asia, not in the West partly. And I think people didn't realize the scale of it. Like I had forgotten just how big it was, how it was like really the biggest natural disaster in modern history, you know, in terms of the number of people that died and the number of countries that were affected, for the wave to hit 14 countries, you know, and to kill so many people was such a big event that it's really important to remind people of what happened 20 years on.